One of my favorite things about living on a small Caribbean island is that is my front yard, and I get to go scuba diving a couple of times a day. Here are some videos about scuba diving. The first one is going to tell you about all the things that can kill you when you're out scuba diving and how we take care of ourselves. The second is going to show you some big sharks that I scuba dove with, and then the last one is going to show you some octopus, because when I night dive out there, I see octopus, sometimes 3-5 octopus a night, and being able to be with octopus repeatedly allows me to understand and appreciate octopus in a way that I never knew before. Dive when we go scuba diving. You think it's because you've got a tank full of air on the back, and that's true, but that's the easy part. After that, it gets really complicated, and it's all that other stuff that killed a lot of people before we figured it out. So come on, I'll show you. It'll be fun. People first tried to breathe underwater. They thought it'd be easy. They just run a reed or a hose up to the surface and then breathe. They'd have air, but it didn't work because it's not air that kills you underwater. It's pressure. Here on the surface, there's the weight of all of the air from sea level up to space. And all of that weight is about 14 pounds per square inch pressing down on you, or what we call 1 atmosphere. Then as you go deeper, you add the weight of the water from about 10 meters up. That is another atmosphere. At 20 meters, another atmosphere, 4 atmospheres at 30 meters, 5, 6 by the time we get down to where we spend a lot of time. Why does that matter? It's because your lungs is a lot like a weightlifter who goes to the gym every day and trains to lift 100 pounds. And then suddenly he's told you're going to die if you don't lift 600 pounds. He can't do it, and so you die. Same thing with your lungs. They're used to lifting 14 pounds. You suddenly ask them to lift 90 pounds, and they can't do it. So even though the air is there, your lungs don't have the capacity to push against the pressure of the water to let you breathe. Solve that with one of these, a scuba tank. And we take air and we pressurize it so that we can put a whole bunch of it inside of this tank. This tank can be pressurized usually to about 200 bar or 200 atmosphere. That means that I can use the pressure inside this tank to help my lungs push back against the pressure of the water. You seen the problem? There's 200 atmospheres in here and I only need 6. If I breathe straight out of this, 200 pounds of pressure will go into my lungs and they will literally explode. We know that because we exploded a couple of people. To solve that problem, we use one of these. This is a regulator that screws on the top here, and this goes in my mouth. And using a series of valves, it can decrease the pressure from 200 atmospheres down to the 3 or 4 that I need while I'm diving at depth. But there's a problem. I need different amounts of pressure to move my lungs open depending on how deep I go. The deeper I go, the more help I need. How does the regulator figure out exactly how much pressure I need so it doesn't blow up my lungs? Now, inside the regulator is a brilliant little simple solution to regulating the amount of air that can come into my body. There's a little diaphragm in there, and as we go deeper, more pressure pushes in on that diaphragm, and it opens up wider, allowing more air pressure to come into my body so that it's always at ambient temperature. That diaphragm also opens and closes as I breathe. So when I need air, it lets air in. But when I'm not breathing, it closes so that no water gets into my mouth. It's ingenious. We solved the pressure problem, but now we have a volume problem. Once we decided to ditch that hose, we needed to bring all the air we're going to breathe with us. And so we decided to use a tank. But here's the problem. My lungs can hold about 6 liters of air. Now I don't use that every breath, but that's my capacity. This tank holds about 11 liters of air, meaning that if I was just to fill this up at 1 atmosphere, I could get 2 breaths out of this. It's not enough to go very far. But because we pressurize it and we put 200 atmospheres of pressure there, now instead of 11 liters, we can get 2,200 liters of air in this tank. That's enough for me to be able to swim on a recreational dive at about 30 to 20 meters for about an hour and a half or even 2 hours. Problem solved, right? No, because we got that pesky pressure problem. The deeper we go, the more pressure is not only on me, but also on gas. And all of the molecules that are in a gas get compressed by the weight of the pressure around it. Meaning that if you had a volume that was this big on the surface, down in the 50 meters, it's going to be about this big, a lot smaller. So every time I breathe, instead of taking 6 liters of air, I now may need to take 24 liters of air with every breath. So the deeper I go, the more and more gas that I need. Now for recreational divers, they usually stay above 30 meters, often 20 meters. And they're able to breathe off of one tank. But if I'm gonna go deep, I need a lot more air than that. So I have to bring more tanks. Recreationally, I'm gonna use 1 tank. But when I go deep, I'm gonna probably use 4 tanks. So I figured it out, right? I figured out the air problem. I now know how to get enough pressure to my lungs to open up and enough pressure that I have enough to breathe while I'm down there. We're good, right? No, because now other stuff is gonna try and kill you. First thing that's gonna try and kill you is nitrogen. 79% of what you're breathing right now is nitrogen. Most of what you're breathing is nitrogen. Only 21% is oxygen, a couple of trace elements. But your body doesn't use nitrogen. That's okay. Your body has adapted to where you breathe 79% oxygen in and you just process it right through and your body pushes it out, no problem. But as you go deeper, those nitrogen molecules get pushed smaller and smaller by the pressure. Technically, it has to do with partial pressure, but we're going to think of it as weight again. At the surface, the nitrogen in a volume has a certain weight, but as we go deeper, it gets compressed down to where the nitrogen in any given volume is heavier. And that's going to try and mess you up in 2 ways. The first is, as nitrogen becomes heavier, your body reacts to it different. So it's inert at the surface. It doesn't have any effect on you. But as you go deeper and deeper and it becomes heavier and heavier, now it turns into a narcotic, meaning that it makes you a little loopy. It's kind of like being on laughing gas at the dentist. You will get something called nitrogen narcosis. And you do, you kind of feel a little bit high. And that's dangerous because when you're really deep, you need to think clearly. If there's a problem, it's easy to make a mistake if you've got nitrogen narcosis. How do you make that disappear? You can't. Every person who dives deep will have nitrogen narcosis. Instead, you learn to adapt to it. Think of it as an alcoholic who is able to function drinking a lot of beers that would put anybody else out because they're used to it. We just learn to be very careful and get used to doing things while suffering from nitrogen narcosis. Second way it'll kill you is it gets stored inside your body. Your body can't expel that nitrogen. A lot of it goes even through your skin, and it can't push against that pressure, meaning that once you get down to 20 meters or deeper, all of that nitrogen is now getting stored inside your body. The deeper you go, the more nitrogen that's getting stored. And that is dangerous because if you come up too fast, it's kind of like taking a Coke can and shaking it up, and it forms all kinds of bubbles under pressure. Your tissues are under pressure from all that nitrogen. So when you come up and the outside pressure is released, you pop open the can and it just comes shooting out and it creates bubbles. And those bubbles can go into your joints. That's why they call it the bends, because when it does, you bend your elbows because it's painful. Or even more dangerous, it goes into your central nervous system and it can give you an aneurysm, it can give you a stroke, it can kill you. That's the bends. To solve that problem, we've got to come up really, really slow so that our body can slowly off-gas the nitrogen. The problem is that can get really, really slow. Let me show you. This is computer planning software, and I'm telling them I want to go to 50 meters for 40 minutes. So 40 minutes down here, what I have to do is come up and then come up in a series of small stops that end up taking a long period of time in order to come up safely. Total time, 209 minutes. That's 3.5 hours. So in order to spend 40 minutes down at the bottom, it's going to take me almost 3 hours to get up. That's a long time that I'm burning air, which means I have to take more down with me. There must be a way to cheat, and there is. This is how we're going to trick our body. Remember, we're taking 4 bottles down with this. 2 of those bottles we're going to fill with air, 79% nitrogen. But 2 of the bottles we're going to fill with, instead of 21% oxygen, one we're going to fill with 50% oxygen and the other 100% oxygen. That reduces the amount of nitrogen we're breathing in. So our body can spend all of its efforts trying to get the old stored nitrogen out instead of processing the new nitrogen coming in with every breath. If I'm breathing 50% oxygen, that means instead of breathing 79% nitrogen, I'm only breathing 50%. And when I'm breathing 100% oxygen, now I'm breathing no nitrogen at all. And look what it does. Now I've added deco gases of 50 and 100%, and I'm gonna have it calculate. And boom, what a change. Now it's only going to take 100 minutes or an hour and a half instead of 3.5 hours to come up. That's because I'm breathing 50% oxygen here and 100% oxygen there. By switching to higher oxygen content, I have cut the length of my dive down in more than a half. So you're thinking, well then why don't you just breathe oxygen all the time? And by now you should know the answer to that. Because it'll kill you. Remember how when we were talking about nitrogen, we said that it got heavier because it gets pushed more and more molecules into a smaller space? The same thing happens with oxygen, but instead of becoming an anesthetic, it actually becomes a poison. It's something called oxygen toxicity. And if you get too much oxygen building up in your system, it will cause you to go into seizures. And if you go into a seizure underwater, it's immediate death, because you will bite through your regulator, it will fall out, and as soon as the seizure ends, your body automatically breathes in, it will suck water in, and you will drown. Death, 100% of the time. You go deeper, the amount of oxygen you can safely breathe decreases. The depth at which you can breathe any particular blend is called the maximum operating depth, or MOD. So the MOD for 100% oxygen is 6 meters or about 20 feet. I can breathe 50% oxygen down to about 21 meters. That is why on our graph, we're breathing air down at the bottom, and we don't start on 50% oxygen till 21 meters and 100% oxygen till 6 meters. The MOD for regular air is about 56 meters, a little bit deeper. So I can't breathe regular air if I want to go below 56 meters. So what do I do then? Well, then I have to do something to lighten the weight of the gas. And that is I add something like helium that's really light. So if oxygen is making it too heavy, I'm going to add helium, which is going to push it up and make it lighter so that I can breathe further down. You know what we should do?
Let's go diving!
I just had a very beautiful experience with an octopus. I was out diving. It was a night dive. I was by myself this time. And it was the second octopus of the night. I see octopus out there almost every time I dive. And he started to move around the lettuce coral that he was in and changing colors, putting his head up so that he could see, his two eyes up so he could see. And I got right up to him. So we were looking right at each other in the eye. When you have the light on, sometimes these little fish come in and they start banging on you and stuff, little worms and stuff. So I turned off my light so they would go away. And to make sure I didn't move, I held onto a piece of rock that was about 18 inches away from the coral where he was. And so I'm there in the pitch black, which I love. You're all alone in the darkness of the sea, and then you can see these little dots of light, the bioluminescence. And it's just so peaceful, and I try not to breathe, so it's quiet. And then suddenly I feel him, and he is grabbed onto my hand with one little tentacle. And I don't move, because if you move, they get scared and then they won't come back. But if you just hold still, sometimes they'll reach out and make this connection with you. And he moved one tentacle up onto my pinky, and then another tentacle up onto my hand, and another up until my hand he had fully grabbed onto. So I finally turned my light on, and there he was, his body here, my hand here, and his tentacles stretching out, pulling on me as if, come with me, I want to show you stuff. And he was so playful, right? He could see me, but I couldn't see him in the dark, and he wanted to interact. He just kind of put his arm all around, and he felt me, and they have sensors, taste buds in their tentacles, in the little suction cup. So he was tasting me and learning who I was. And he hung out there for a little while, and then he let go, and he stood up with his two eyes like that, looking at me, and I just looked back, and then he slinked off down and went off exploring the reef. And we spent a couple more minutes together, but that was a magical moment.